Why would a lonely artist open his home to a terrified, scarred dog in the middle of a snowstorm? What dark past is this dog running from, and why is a dangerous man suddenly knocking on their door? Stay with us, because this is not just a rescue story. It's a miracle you won't believe. The cold wind howled down Whitmore's narrow streets, rattling shutters and whispering under doors as if the city itself were shivering. Lucien Marek sat by his window, his long fingers stained with paint, a steaming mug of tea warming his palms. 43 years old, Lucien was a solitary figure, tall and lean, his dark hair streaked with gray, brushed back carelessly as if he forgot it was there. His pale green eyes, once bright with youthful ambition, now softened by years of quiet disappointment, watched the first flakes of snow dance past the street lamp outside. His home, a weathered brick townhouse with peeling white shutters, had once belonged to his parents, a house too large for one man, filled with the silent company of half-finished canvases and memories packed in boxes. Lucien wasn't bitter about his solitude. Life, he had learned, had its own currents. But as the forecast promised a harsh winter storm, even he couldn't deny the sting of loneliness that clung to the air like frost on a window pane. As evening crept closer, Lucien moved about his kitchen, humming tunelessly as he prepared a simple supper. The radio mumbled the news of an incoming blizzard, but he paid it little mind. He had survived winters before. He would again. But just as he reached for a loaf of bread, a faint sound pulled him from his thoughts. It was so soft he might have dismissed it as the wind. A weak, almost desperate whimper carried through the icy gusts. Lucien froze, his heart ticking up a beat. He set the bread down and crossed to the front window, peering out into the dim, snowy street. At first he saw nothing but the swaying shadows of the maple tree in his front yard. Then movement, something small, huddled near the iron gate at the end of his walkway. Lucien squinted, breath-fogging the glass. He saw fur, yellowish-brown fur matted and clinging to a bony frame. A German shepherd, or what was left of one, crouched at his gate, trembling violently, its head, low ears pinned back. Lucien's breath caught. The dog was a pitiful sight, its coat dirty and thin ribs visible through its sides, and its eyes deep brown, almost black in the night, fixed on the light spilling from his window as if it were the last star in the world. Without thinking, Lucien grabbed his coat. A thick wool thing that smelled faintly of turpentine, shoved his feet into boots and hurried outside. The cold slapped him full in the face, stealing his breath as the snowflakes thickened, swirling like ghosts around the flickering street lamp. As Lucien approached, the dog didn't bark or bolt. It only watched, shivering so hard its legs knocked together, a low whimper slipping from its dry, cracked muzzle. "Hey there," Lucien murmured, his voice soft, cautious. "Easy, boy." Or girl. Now closer he could see the shepherd was female young, but no longer a pup, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, though her sunken sides and weary expression aged her beyond her years. Her ears flicked, her tail twitched once in uncertainty, but she made no move to flee. Lucien crouched carefully, extending a gloved hand, his heart thrumming in his chest. The shepherd lifted her head, weakly sniffed, then lowered it again, with a sigh that tore at something deep inside Lucien. Just as he considered how to coax her inside, the soft creak of his front gate announced another presence. Lucien came, a voice light and edged with concern. Lucien turned to see Ingrid Morton approaching, a figure bundled in a heavy green coat knit cap, pulled low over wisps of silver hair. Ingrid was 70, a lifelong resident of Whitmore, with sharp blue eyes and a kind smile that crinkled her weathered face. She was a widow, living alone 2 doors down, and had long ago appointed herself Lucien's unofficial guardian, much to his quiet amusement. In her gloved hands she carried a covered basket fragrant with the unmistakable scent of fresh bread. I brought you something before the storm seals us in, Ingrid said, her voice carrying through the wind. But then her eyes dropped to the trembling form by Lucian's boots, and her expression softened into a frown. Oh dear. She shuffled closer, peering at the shepherd with practiced wisdom. She's been around, hasn't she? I've heard talk. Folks leaving town, heading south for the winter, and leaving behind more than just furniture. Ingrid shook her head sadly. Poor creatures. Lucian felt the cold pressing in the snow, creeping through the seams of his boots. I can't leave her here, he murmured, glancing at Ingrid. She won't survive the night. Ingrid nodded, her smile faint but approving. You've a good heart, Lucian Merrick. Always have. With that, she pressed the basket into his arms. You'll need this more than I do, I think. Inside the house felt cavernous after the biting cold. Lucian toed off his boots and set the basket on the table, then knelt by the shepherd, who now huddled cautiously near the door. It's okay, he murmured, reaching slowly to unbutton his coat. His fingers brushed against the dog's fur. It was icy coarse and smelled faintly of rain and earth. The shepherd flinched, but didn't pull away. Taking a deep breath, Lucian unzipped his coat fully and gently wrapped part of it around her thin frame. He felt a shudder ripple through her body, a sigh so deep it trembled against his chest. For the first time in a long while, Lucian felt the tightness in his own chest ease. He didn't know if she would trust him or if she would stay, but at that moment it didn't matter. There was a storm outside, and a creature here who needed warmth, and a man with more than enough to spare. The storm could rage as long as it liked. Inside the little house on Whitmore Street, for tonight at least, there would be light and warmth, and perhaps, just perhaps, the start of something new. The night deepened around Whitmore, the snowstorm wrapping the city in a thick white hush. Inside Lucian Merrick's old townhouse, the air was filled with the faint crackle of a space heater and the rich aroma of fresh bread that Ingrid Morton had brought earlier. Lucian sat cross-legged on the floor, his dark hair slightly damp from melted snow, his green eyes thoughtful as he watched the trembling figure before him. The German shepherd, still nameless, had curled herself into the corner of the living room, her thin body pressed against the wall, close to the warmth, but not quite daring to join it. Her fur was a patchwork of gold and black dulled by dirt, with faint scars crisscrossing her flank and legs silent testimonies to the life she had survived. Lucian studied her quietly, feeling a pang in his chest. There was something about her eyes, dark and luminous, that reminded him of a fading lantern struggling against the dark. He moved slowly, careful not to startle her, and placed a shallow bowl of water a few feet away, followed by bits of the bread Ingrid had brought. The dog's ears flicked, her nose twitched, but she stayed curled, her gaze flicking between Lucian and the small offerings on the floor. Lucian gave a small, sad smile. You're brave, you know that, he murmured softly, settling onto the couch. You've made it this far. Now we just have to get through the night. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he feared breaking the delicate thread of trust forming between them. Reaching for his sketchbook, Lucian found his fingers moving almost without thought. The lines took shape quickly, rough at first, then more certain, the curve of the shepherd's back, the tuck of her paws beneath her, the wariness in her eyes. Art had always been his way of understanding the world, of reaching for things words couldn't touch. And tonight, as the storm raged beyond the window, Lucian began to capture the quiet resilience of the creature fate had placed on his doorstep. The phone rang, shattering the stillness. Lucian jumped, nearly dropping his pencil. The shepherd flinched, muscles taut, her eyes wide. He hesitated, then crossed the room to pick up the receiver. Lucian Merrick, he answered, his voice low, glancing over his shoulder as the dog remained frozen in the corner. Lucian, it's Amelia. The voice on the other end was warm and bright, touched with laughter, even in the face of a storm. Amelia Voss had been Lucian's friend since university days, a petite woman with auburn curls, freckles scattered across her cheeks like tiny stars, and a habit of talking with her hands even when no one could see. She was a veterinarian at the local clinic, known for her fierce determination and kindness toward even the most hopeless cases. "I was just checking in before the storm gets worse," Amelia continued. "I thought of you and that old townhouse of yours. Tell me you're at least stocked up on tea and not planning to paint through a blackout again." Lucian gave a soft chuckle, the sound unfamiliar in his own ears. "I'm fine, Emmy. But something's come up." A pause on the line, then a shift in her voice, a sharper edge of concern. "Lucian, what is it?" "There's a dog," Lucian murmured, watching as the shepherd finally lifted her head, nose quivering in the direction of the bread. "A German shepherd." She was outside in the snow. She's skin and bones, scared out of her mind, but she's here now, inside. Amelia exhaled the sound, a mix of relief and alarm. "Good for you for bringing her in. Listen, Lucian, once the storm clears, you need to bring her to me. I can check her over, make sure she's not carrying anything dangerous, distemper, frostbite, parasites. But for tonight, just keep her warm. Offer water, small bits of food, and go slow, okay? Shepherds are smart, but a frightened one can lash out if cornered." Lucian's eyes softened, tracing the fragile curve of the dog's body. "She hasn't shown a hint of aggression, just exhaustion. And something else I can't quite name." His voice dipped. "She looks like she's lost everything." Amelia's tone gentled. "Then maybe she's exactly where she needs to be tonight. And Lucian, thank you for being the person I always knew you were." They spoke for a few minutes longer, Amelia offering gentle instructions and promising to call again in the morning. When Lucian finally set the phone down, he found the shepherd had inched forward, one cautious paw stretched toward the bread. Her ribs showed starkly against her sides as she lowered her head to sniff the offering. Lucian stayed still, watching as she took a tentative nibble, then another until the slice was gone, and her dark eyes flicked up to meet his. It was a brief moment, a heartbeat of connection, but Lucian felt the weight of it, like a warm stone in his chest. "Well," he murmured softly, "I suppose we can't just keep calling you girl, can we?" He rubbed his chin, thoughtful. Names floated through his mind, none quite right until his gaze fell to the battered copy of an old book on his shelf. Norse mythology, a favorite from his youth. His lips curved into a smile. "Freya," he whispered. "That's who you are, isn't it? Brave, fierce, survivor." He tried the name aloud. Freya. The shepherd's ears flicked at the sound, her gaze steady and unblinking. As midnight approached, Lucian stretched a blanket near the heater and dimmed the lights. Freya watched every movement, wary but unafraid. He left the sketchbook open on the table, the rough portrait of her form visible in the lamplight, then settled onto the couch with a sigh. Above the storm's muffled roar, he thought he heard the faintest sound, a sigh, almost a hum, the whisper of a creature slowly, cautiously allowing herself to rest. And as Lucian closed his eyes, the house felt just a little less empty. Morning broke over Whitmore in a wash of pale light, the storm's rage now a quiet hush blanketing the city. Snow coated the streets in soft mounds, muffling footsteps and slowing cars to cautious crawls. Inside Lucian Merrick's townhouse, the atmosphere was still heavy with the scent of cooling tea and the faint musk of damp fur. Lucian stood near the window, his green eyes watching the gray sky, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug as if it were a lifeline. Behind him on a folded blanket near the heater, Freya lay curled, her chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. Her fur, now mostly dry, revealed more than just her natural beauty. It revealed the marks she carried. Lucian had seen them when she stretched pale lines across her belly, a small knot of scar tissue near her back leg, and faint patches of missing fur along her ribs. They told a story, one she could never put into words, but which Lucian read as clearly as ink on canvas. He knelt quietly, reaching out a tentative hand. Freya flicked an ear but didn't move away. Gently, Lucian let his fingers brush her side, feeling the rough edge of healed skin beneath the soft fur. "What did they do to you, girl?" he whispered, voice thick with sorrow. Freya stirred her nose, twitching eyes half-lidded but watchful. She allowed the touch, but there was a tightness in her body, a readiness to spring, not trust, yet not fully. Lucian withdrew his hand, sighing softly as he sat cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook balanced on his knees. That afternoon a knock sounded at the door. Lucian blinked in surprise. Few braved the post-storm streets. He opened the door to find Ingrid Morton, bundled in a thick maroon coat, her silver hair peeking from under a knitted hat, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Ingrid smiled, eyes crinkling warmly, holding a small tray covered in foil. "Thought you might need something hearty," she said, her voice brisk but kind. "I made chicken stew, should keep you both warm." Lucian chuckled, stepping aside. "You're a miracle, Ingrid." As she entered, her sharp blue eyes flicked to Freya. "Ah, there she is. Poor thing." Lucian gestured to the scars. "She's been through more than I imagined." Ingrid's expression softened into something heavy, her hands resting briefly on the back of a nearby chair. "You know, Lucian," she murmured, "there's been talk around town. A man named Victor Lang. He moved here last year. Trouble if you ask anyone. Big man, rough hands, temper like a snake. People say he had dogs, big ones, German shepherds mostly. But when he got in trouble, finds complaints from neighbors, he left. And the dogs, well, not all of them made it out." Her voice dipped with quiet anger. "I'd bet my best kettle this girl's one of his." Lucian felt his throat tighten. He glanced at Freya, who had lifted her head at the sound of voices, ears half-raised, dark eyes watching. "So she's not just a stray," he murmured. "She's a survivor." Ingrid reached out, squeezing his shoulder gently. "You're giving her a second chance, Lucian. That matters." Not long after Ingrid left, another knock came, quicker, lighter. Lucian frowned, opening the door to a young man with a friendly, open face. Felix Bauer. 25 carried the easy confidence of someone used to working outdoors. His sandy blonde hair stuck up in an uneven fringe beneath a knit cap, and his hazel eyes shone with curiosity. He wore a rescue team jacket, bright orange, with reflective stripes, and a pair of well-worn boots caked in old mud. Slung across his back was a messenger bag marked with the Whitmore Animal Rescue logo. "Hey there," Felix greeted, offering a hand with a grin. "I'm Felix. I heard you might have taken in a stray last night." Lucian shook his hand, explaining how Freya had arrived on his doorstep. Felix's gaze softened as he stepped inside, crouching low near the edge of the room, careful not to crowd the dog. "Hey, beautiful," he murmured, voice low and gentle. "Aren't you a brave one?" Freya watched him warily, her body tense but not fearful. Felix stayed still, giving her space, only glancing up to Lucian after a moment. "She's lucky she found you," Felix said. "Most wouldn't have survived a storm like that." They spoke quietly, Felix asking questions. Had she eaten? Was she drinking water? Had Lucian seen any limping or coughing? Lucian answered best he could, grateful for the young man's calm, reassuring presence. Felix had a quiet kind of strength, the kind that came from years of coaxing terrified creatures out of alleys and under porches. As they talked, Freya shifted slightly, nose twitching toward Felix's curiosity, slowly winning over fear. That night, when the world was quiet again, Lucian dozed on the couch, the sketchbook open beside him. A sudden sound tore through the calm, the sharp wail of a siren cutting across the city. In an instant, Freya was up, body rigid, a low whine caught in her throat. Her eyes darted wildly, and she scrambled for the corner, pressing herself against the wall, as if trying to disappear. Lucian startled awake, heart pounding, as he saw her trembling, her claws scrabbling uselessly against the floor. "Freya," he called softly, rising to his knees, hands open, heart aching. "It's okay. You're safe." But Freya's panic was complete, her breath coming in short, sharp pants, eyes wide with terror. Lucian sat down on the floor a few feet away, voice low, and even murmuring nonsense words, anything gentle to fill the air. Slowly, as the siren faded into the distance, Freya's trembling eased, her chest heaving as she collapsed onto the floor, head buried under her paws. Lucian's throat tightened as he watched, helpless, knowing that whatever haunted her couldn't be erased with kind words alone. When the quiet returned, Lucian reached for his sketchbook again, not to draw but to write. Notes, thoughts, a plan for the days ahead. Freya needed help more than he could give alone. But in that moment, as he glanced at the fragile creature, now asleep once more by the heater, Lucian made himself a quiet promise he would not give up on her. No matter how long it took, no matter how many scars she carried, they would face it together. The days that followed blurred together in a soft hush of falling snow and the steady rhythm of a house awakening to life. Outside, Whitmore was still buried beneath heavy drifts, cars left idle, beneath thick coats of ice, street lamps flickering like distant stars swallowed by white. But inside Lucian Merrick's townhouse, warmth bloomed in quiet, patient circles, the crackle of the heater, the scent of simmering broth, the faint sound of pencil against paper. Lucian, once a man of slow mornings and silent afternoons, now moved with the kind of attentiveness reserved for those caring for another. Freya had begun to settle. The German shepherd no longer flinched at every sound or darted into corners when footsteps approached. Her golden black fur had taken on a healthier sheen under Lucian's care, though the scars remained a gentle reminder of the life she had survived. She was a young adult, maybe 4 years old, lean but strong beneath the frailty, with keen dark eyes that watched Lucian wherever he went. Lucian often found himself speaking to her without realizing it. "You've turned me into a proper host," he murmured one morning as he folded blankets near the heater. Freya tilted her head, one ear flicking up in that curious way that always tugged a smile from him. "I've never shared this much space with anyone you know." His voice softened as he crouched beside her. "But I think I'm getting used to you, Freya." The snowstorm had calmed to a steady whisper, but the town remained frozen in place. Groceries, mail, and visitors were rare, and Lucian found himself embracing the solitude less as isolation and more as sanctuary. It gave him time to observe, and in those quiet hours he discovered things about Freya that surprised him. She was no ordinary stray. Lucian noticed it first when he accidentally dropped a spoon in the kitchen. The metallic clang rang out, and before Lucian could react, Freya was alert ears, perked nose, lifted body, poised, not in fear, but in focus. Another time, when a bird brushed against the window pane, her head snapped toward the sound. With laser precision, every muscle tensed, waiting. It wasn't just alertness, it was training. Lucian watched her track faint scents from the front door to the back hallway. Nose low, steps measured. She moved like a dog who had once been taught to search, to protect, to listen for the things most humans never heard. One evening, as they sat together in the dim glow of the lamp, Lucian spoke softly, fingers brushing the page of his sketchbook. "Who trained you, girl?" he wondered aloud. "What were you before all this?" Freya only blinked, resting her head against her paws, the firelight catching the soft rise and fall of her chest. The next day brought a knock on the door, light but purposeful. Lucian opened it to find Felix Bauer once again, his cheeks red from the cold hair ruffled beneath a gray beanie. Felix carried a tablet in one gloved hand, his bright hazel eyes crinkling in a smile. "Morning, Lucian. Hope I'm not interrupting. I was checking in, wanted to see how your guest's doing." Lucian welcomed him in gesturing to where Freya lay on her blanket ears, twitching but no longer shrinking from company. Felix crouched careful to keep his body loose and unthreatening, murmuring quiet greetings to the dog. "She's looking better," he said, glancing up with approval. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." As they sipped tea in the kitchen, Felix leaned back, tapping the tablet. "I've been thinking, would you be open to posting a photo of her on the rescue network? Nothing with your address, just basic info. There's a chance someone's looking for her, or at least we might figure out where she came from." Lucian hesitated, his fingers tightening slightly on his mug. The idea of someone claiming Freya unsettled him in ways he couldn't fully explain. But Felix's eyes were kind, his voice steady. "We'll be careful, Lucian. And you'd be surprised sometimes we find out important details, like old medical records or past owners who actually cared." Finally, Lucian nodded. "All right," he murmured. "Let's do it." He set about taking the photo himself, crouching by Freya with quiet patience. It took time, many softly spoken words, small treats placed carefully near the camera. But eventually Freya lifted her head, her dark eyes steady and watchful. Lucian captured the image just as her ears perked forward, a glimpse of curiosity flickering beneath her guarded calm. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. It was Emilia Voss, her voice bright but edged with professional focus. "Lucien, I heard from Felix you've got quite the house guest. Once the roads clear up, bring her by the clinic. I'll do a full checkup. No charge, don't argue." Lucian smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Emilia was a petite woman with a fierce spirit, her auburn hair tied back in a loose braid, her eyes sharp with intelligence and kindness. She had always been a whirlwind of energy, the sort of person who found homes for stray cats between surgeries and organized fundraisers between late-night emergency calls. Knowing Freya would be in her care brought Lucian a rare quiet comfort. That evening, as twilight deepened and the lamplight softened the edges of the room, Lucian sat on the floor near Freya. She shifted closer, her head resting lightly against his knee, the barest flicker of trust breaking through the shell of her fear. Outside, the world remained frozen, but within these four walls, the thaw had already begun. Lucian, once a man who had resigned himself to solitude, now found himself learning a new language. A quiet, patient exchange of trust offered in glances in stillness, in the soft weight of a head resting near his hand. The storm outside had stilled, but in Lucian's heart a quiet storm of its own was unraveling, and for the first time in years, it left behind something more than silence. It left behind hope. The morning after the snow finally loosened its grip on Whitmore, sunlight glittered across rooftops and icy branches like shattered glass. Lucian Merrick stood at the window watching as neighbors cautiously emerged, shovels in hand, their laughter echoing faintly across the narrow street. Beside him, Freya pressed her nose to the cold pain ears flicking forward as children's voices drifted through the crisp air. Her dark eyes, once hollow and wary, now shimmered with cautious curiosity. Lucian reached down, resting a hand gently on her back. "It's time, girl," he murmured, voice soft, with both resolve and worry. "We promised Emilia we'd visit." Freya tilted her head slightly as if she understood, and let out a faint huff of breath against the glass, leaving a foggy imprint shaped like a delicate cloud. Bundling into his coat, Lucian moved carefully, slipping a makeshift leash around Freya's neck. She stiffened at first, but surprised him by stepping calmly to his side. The walk to Emilia's clinic was slow, the streets still slick with ice. Freya moved with a surprising grace, paws crunching softly against frozen ground, her nose lifting to catch every scent along the way. Damp brick chimneys smoked the distant trace of salt from the road crews. The veterinary clinic sat on a corner lot, its sign swaying slightly in the wind. Whitmore Animal Care, Dr. Emilia Voss, DVM. Amelia met them at the door, her petite figure bundled in a green parka, auburn hair braided over one shoulder, her face round and freckled, lit with a wide grin as she opened her arms. "There's my brave girl." She beamed, though it was clear she meant both Lucian and Freya. Inside the clinic was warm, smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Amelia worked with calm efficiency, her fingers sure and gentle as she examined Freya. "She's underweight, but you've done wonders already, Lucian," she murmured, running practiced hands over Freya's ribs and checking her teeth. When she reached for a scanner, Freya flinched, and Lucian felt a twist in his chest. Amelia frowned as she passed the wand over Freya's shoulder once, twice, 3 times, but no familiar beep came. "She's had a chip removed," Amelia said quietly, her brow furrowing. "See this small scar here?" She parted the fur near Freya's neck. "That's where it would have been. Someone deliberately cut it out. That's not a stray you found, Lucian. That's a dog someone didn't want to be found." The words hung heavy in the air as Lucian absorbed them, his fingers tightening slightly against his coat. He crouched beside Freya, brushing his fingers along her jaw as she pressed lightly into his touch. "We'll keep you safe, Freya," he promised softly. "I swear it." That evening, as Lucian sat in his living room, sipping tea and sketching quietly, a knock rattled the door. Felix Bauer stood outside, his cheeks flushed from the cold hazel eyes shining with urgency. His rescue team jacket was zipped tight, and a folder bulged under one arm. Lucian Felix greeted his usual easy smile, replaced with a more serious edge. "Mind if I come in? We need to talk." Inside, Felix settled at the table, spreading out a small stack of papers. "I did some digging," he began, his voice low. "There's a report filed with the Rescue Network about a man named Victor Lang. Mid-40s, heavy-build, dark hair, known in a few towns over. Bad reputation. He kept several shepherds, bred them, maybe trained them. But when complaints started rolling in, noise, aggression, neglect, he disappeared." Felix's fingers drummed against the paper. One of the dogs was reported missing around the same time. Lucian felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "You think Freya belonged to him?" Felix nodded grimly. "And that's not all. Word is Lang's been spotted back in Whitmore. Someone saw him yesterday at the gas station on the highway." The room fell into a tense hush. Freya, sensing the shift, rose from her blanket, crossing slowly to press her head against Lucian's knee. He felt the faint tremble of her body, the silent question in her gaze. "Lucian," Felix continued gently, "we can help. We can report him, notify the authorities. But if Lang knows Freya's here, you need to be ready." Lucian ran a hand through his dark hair, streaks of gray catching the light. He had always thought of himself as a man resigned to quiet, to solitude, to keeping his head down when the world became loud. But now, as Freya leaned against him, the old weight of detachment shifted. He looked at Felix and gave a quiet, steady nod. "We'll protect her, whatever it takes." That night, long after Felix had left and the house fell into shadow, Lucian sat by the window, sketchbook balanced on his lap. Freya lay nearby, eyes half closed, the faint rise and fall of her chest, the only sound in the room. Lucian's pencil moved across the paper in slow, sure lines, capturing not the scars, not the fear, but the quiet resilience of a dog learning to trust again. And in the stillness, Lucian felt something stir within himself too. Something long dormant, the stirring of a heart no longer content to live only for its own quiet survival. The evening descended on Whitmore like a quiet omen, the last rays of sun fading over snowbanks piled high along the narrow streets. Lucian Merrick stood in his living room, the glow from a small lamp casting long shadows along the walls. Freya lay curled near his feet, her once gaunt body filling out the faint shimmer of health slowly returning to her coat. Yet there was a tension in the air that neither warmth nor quiet could erase. Lucian felt it in the way Freya's ears twitched at every sound, the way her dark eyes flicked toward the door whenever footsteps passed outside. Lucian's phone buzzed, and he picked it up to see a message from Felix Bauer. Heads up, Victor Lang was seen on Whitmore Street an hour ago. Stay inside. We're on standby. Lucian's heart tightened. He exhaled slowly, lowering himself to the floor beside Freya, running a hand gently over her head. "We'll be all right," he murmured. But even he heard the slight tremor in his voice. It was nearly an hour later when the knock came. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or the friendly thump of Felix, but a slow, deliberate pounding heavy against the old wood. Lucian rose, pulse racing, and pulled the curtain back a fraction. Standing on the front steps was Victor Lang. Victor was a man of looming presence, broad-shouldered and thick-necked with short dark hair cropped close to his scalp, and a leather jacket stretched over his bulky frame. His eyes were small and sharp, set deep under a heavy brow, and his mouth twisted in a smirk that didn't reach them. Years of hard living and harder dealings had left their mark on his weathered face, and the cold had flushed his cheeks with a raw reddish tint. Lucian opened the door just enough to step outside, pulling his coat tight. Freya followed instinctively, but froze in the doorway, trembling as her eyes locked on Victor. The change in her was instant: ears, flattened, tail-tucked body rigid with fear. A low whimper escaped her throat as she pressed herself behind Lucian's leg. Victor's smirk widened. "Didn't expect you to have a watchdog, Merrick," he drawled, his voice rough like gravel. "Except funny thing, it's my dog you've got hiding behind you." Lucian straightened his jaw, tightening. "Her name is Freya," he said evenly, "and she's not yours anymore." Victor snorted, shifting his weight hands stuffed casually into his jacket pockets. "You've no claim on her. No papers, no proof. I'm just here to collect what's mine, nice and simple." From inside the house, Freya let out another soft whine, shrinking further into the doorway. Lucian felt her trembling through the fabric of his pants and took a slow breath to steady himself. "She's terrified of you," Lucian said quietly. "You can see that. That's all the proof I need." Victor's eyes flicked briefly toward Freya, his expression hardening. "That's what a good guard dog's supposed to look like, obedient. You wouldn't understand." His smirk faded. "Listen, old man. I'm giving you a chance to hand her over now before things get messy." Behind Lucian, the porch light flickered on, casting the two men in sharp relief against the snowy backdrop. Across the street, a curtain moved Ingrid Morton's window. Lucian had called her earlier, and he knew she was watching. Moments later, headlights swept up the street, and a small car crunched to a halt at the curb. Felix emerged, breath misting in the cold, his lean figure wrapped in a bright orange rescue jacket. His eyes swept from Lucian to Victor with a calm alertness, though a faint crease lined his brow. "Evening, gentlemen." Felix said, his tone light but his gaze steady. "Is there a problem here?" Victor's lips curled, but before he could answer, another figure approached from the side. Emilia Voss, auburn braid tucked beneath a wool hat, her petite form wrapped in a long coat. She carried herself with quiet authority, the kind honed in emergency rooms and rescue sites. "Lucian," she called softly, stepping to his side. "I called the animal welfare officer. They're on their way." Victor's jaw tightened, his smirk souring into a scowl. "You people think you can push me around." His voice lowered, his eyes narrowing at Lucian. "You've got no legal standing. No papers, no contracts. That dog's mine." Lucian drew a steadying breath, his fingers brushing against Freya's tense flank. "She has scars," he said softly but firmly. "Missing teeth. She flinches at every loud noise. And she's terrified of you. Maybe the law can't prove you hurt her, but we both know what you did. And I'm not letting you near her again." The cold pressed in the night, holding its breath. Victor's fists clenched, his shoulders bunching. But before he could speak, the flash of red and blue lights swept around the corner. A marked animal welfare truck pulled up, followed by a local patrol car. A young woman in a dark uniform stepped out of the truck, short and sturdy, with a no-nonsense air. Officer Tara Nguyen, known in the neighborhood as fair but firm, approached her, dark eyes calm and assessing. She was Vietnamese-American, early 30s, with cropped black hair and a measured, steady manner that put people off balance before they realized she was already 2 steps ahead. "Evening, folks," Tara greeted, nodding to the group. "I've got a report of a disputed animal custody case here." She turned her gaze to Victor. "Sir, do you have documentation proving ownership?" Victor's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he pulled out a battered phone, fumbling for photos. Tara raised a hand. "That's not enough. We'll need vet records, microchip info, or adoption papers. Until then, the dog stays here. You're free to file a formal claim at the station, but you will not remove her tonight." Victor's face darkened, his jaw working, but he forced a sharp exhale through his nose. "This isn't over," he muttered, backing away with a glare at Lucian. "Enjoy your charity case, Merrick." With that, he turned on his heel boots, crunching through the snow as he disappeared into the night. Lucian let out a slow breath, his knees softening with the weight of the moment. Freya pressed herself fully against his side, trembling, but as Victor's figure faded, her body began to relax, her head lifting just slightly. Felix clapped a hand on Lucian's shoulder. "You did, good man," he murmured. Emilia gave a quiet nod, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and concern. That night, as the house settled once more into silence, Lucian knelt beside Freya, his hand resting lightly on her head. She leaned into his touch, a faint, shaky sigh escaping her chest. And in that simple act of trust, Lucian felt the first solid thread of victory, not the kind won in courts or with contracts, but the kind earned quietly, patiently, night after night, heart to heart. In the days following Victor's failed confrontation, the atmosphere in Lucian's home shifted from tension to quiet determination. The weight of the encounter hung in the air, but it no longer carried the sharp edge of fear, it carried purpose. Lucian Merrick, a man who once preferred his life to be filled only with paint canvas and silence, now found himself plunged into a world of petitions, legal paperwork, and community meetings. He had made his decision. He would fight for Freya, not as a borrowed guest in his home, but as family. Each morning, Lucian documented Freya's behavior with his camera. He gently lifted her paws to photograph the old scars along her pads. He took close-ups of the faint marks on her flank, and he filmed the tremble in her body when a car engine backfired outside, or when the neighbor's metal gate slammed. Freya, once wary of any sudden movement, now tolerated these moments with a quiet patience, watching Lucian with her dark eyes, as though she too understood that something important was unfolding. One morning, Lucian sat in the sunlit kitchen, scrolling through his notes when Emilia Voss called. Her voice, brisk but warm, filled the kitchen. "Lucian, I signed you up for that pet first aid course at the community center. I'm not taking no for an answer." Lucian laughed softly, a sound he realized he hadn't heard from himself in weeks. Emilia was like that, small in stature, her freckled face nearly always set in a determined expression, her auburn braids swinging as she marched through emergencies and daily chaos alike. "Thank you," Emilia, Lucian said genuinely, "for everything." The class was held in a modest building on Maple Street with folding chairs and a projector screen that buzzed faintly in the background. Lucian found himself surrounded by an eclectic mix of pet owners, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Roger with his aging golden retriever, a shy teenage girl, Lily, with a timid tabby cat peeking from a carrier, and a no-nonsense woman named Priya, whose gray pit bull mix sat calmly at her feet. Lucian listened carefully as the instructor, a cheerful middle-aged man named Peter Walsh, demonstrated CPR techniques on a stuffed dog and walked them through the signs of shock, heat stroke, and injury. Lucian practiced wrapping a bandage around a foam leg and surprised himself at the care and precision in his movements. For a man who had spent years focused on delicate brushstrokes, this new kind of touch, practical, purposeful, felt both unfamiliar and deeply meaningful. Meanwhile, Felix Barr was working his own kind of magic in Whitmore. At just 25, Felix was the kind of person whose energy filled a room. Before his words did his tousled blonde hair, always slightly wind-blown, his bright hazel eyes alight with enthusiasm. With the help of his colleagues at the rescue shelter, Felix organized a public event at the town square, a gathering meant to raise awareness about animal rights and responsible ownership. Flyers were posted in shop windows, local cafes, and the library, all inviting residents to meet Whitmore's animal heroes. Lucian was reluctant to bring Freya at first, worried that the crowd might overwhelm her. But on the morning of the event, as he clipped on her leash, Freya surprised him. She stood steady-tail, held cautiously low, but not tucked, and when they arrived at the square, she remained at Lucian's side, watching the bustling scene with a calm alertness. Children clustered around tables filled with adoption posters. Neighbors dropped coins into donation jars, and volunteers passed out leaflets on recognizing animal abuse. Felix, moving easily through the crowd, made his way to Lucian, flashing his usual easy grin. "She's doing great," Felix said softly, crouching to offer Freya a gentle scratch behind the ear. "You've both come a long way." Lucian smiled, a quiet gratitude flickering across his features. It was near the end of the event that Lucian met Sophia Granz. She approached him with a measured grace, a tall woman in her early 60s with iron-gray hair swept into a low bun, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of posture that spoke of decades spent navigating courtrooms. Sophia was a retired animal law attorney known locally for her volunteer work and had heard about Lucian and Freya through Amelia. She extended a gloved hand. "Lucian Merrick," she asked, her voice low, deliberate, but not unkind. "I've heard you might need an advocate." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. Lucian felt himself straighten unconsciously. As they spoke, Sophia's questions were precise: dates, details, witnesses, documentation. She listened intently, nodding occasionally, and when Lucian described Freya's reaction to Victor, Sophia's eyes softened just slightly. "We can make a case," she said finally, "but we need to be methodical. I'll help you file the necessary claims and prepare any statements." "And Mr. Merrick," her lips curved into the barest smile, "you're doing the right thing." That evening, Lucian returned home with Freya, the town square's laughter still echoing faintly in his ears. He sat on the floor, with her unbuckling her leash, and watched as she settled onto her blanket with a long sigh. He reached for his sketchbook fingers, brushing the edges of the worn pages, and let the pencil move in slow, familiar strokes. He no longer drew the hollow-eyed, trembling figure from those first nights. Instead, his lines captured something steadier, a creature still carrying her scars. Yes, but now lifting her head to the sun, ears flicking at the sound of laughter, tail resting softly against the floor in a quiet, tentative peace. As the light faded from the room, Lucian realized he no longer stood at the edge of two lives divided between past and present. With every choice he made, with every quiet promise to Freya, he was stepping fully into the one they were building together. And for the first time in years, Lucian Mark found himself ready to fight, not just for survival, but for belonging. The winter had loosened its icy grip on Whitmore, the streets glistening with thawing snow as sunlight filtered through bare-branched trees. Outside Lucian Merrick's townhouse, a small crowd gathered, neighbors, friends, and familiar faces from the weeks of quiet struggle that had reshaped Lucian's life. Felix stood by the gate, his sandy blonde hair tousled and a grin stretched wide across his face as he balanced a tray of pastries. Empia bustled nearby, her auburn braid peeking from beneath a knitted cap, setting out mugs of steaming cider on a fold-out table. Ingrid Morton, bundled in her maroon coat, moved through the group with graceful authority, pressing fresh-baked rolls into eager hands. And near the center, with an air of quiet command, stood Sophia Granz, her tall, elegant figure wrapped in a dark wool coat, her sharp blue eyes softened by the rare warmth of a quiet smile. Inside, Lucian knelt on the living room floor, fastening a new collar around Freya's neck. The German shepherd watched him with calm, steady eyes, no longer filled with flinching doubt, but with the patient trust of a soul that had come through fire and found a safe shore. Her fur gleamed in the sunlight that streamed through the window, and her tail gave a gentle thump against the floor as Lucian scratched beneath her ear. "Well, my girl," Lucian murmured, voice thick with quiet wonder. "We made it." The news had come just a day ago. Victor Lang, under the weight of mounting evidence, testimony from neighbors, and a formal investigation spurred by Sophia's meticulous work, had been banned from owning or approaching animals for the rest of his life. The ruling came with a restraining order barring him from setting foot within a mile of Lucian's home. The victory, hard-fought and hard-earned, left Lucian standing on unfamiliar ground, a place of safety he had almost forgotten existed. As the doorbell rang, Lucian rose to open it, greeted by the familiar laughter and chatter of the people who had become his accidental family. Felix was the first to sweep in, his hazel eyes bright as he clapped Lucian on the shoulder. "Told you we'd win," he grinned. Emilia followed, wrapping Lucian in a quick, fierce hug, while Ingrid offered a small, crinkled smile and a loaf of honey bread. Sophia arrived last, her handshake firm, her words simple but resonant. "You did good, Lucian. You both did." The party settled into easy rhythms, cider poured into mismatched mugs, laughter echoing off the old walls, and Freya weaving gently among the guests, her presence met with careful hands and soft voices. The children from the neighborhood, eyes wide with curiosity, knelt on the floor to stroke her sleek fur, their giggles lighting the room as Freya sat calmly, ears tilted forward, tail sweeping in quiet delight. Lucian stood by the window for a moment, watching it all, the sun casting gold across the hardwood floor, the voices of friends blending into a warm hum, the sight of Freya at ease among strangers, and felt the subtle, startling shift of his world. He was no longer the solitary artist of Whitmore, hidden in his townhouse behind canvas and quiet. He was something more, something connected. In the weeks that followed, Lucian turned that connection into action. He cleared out the old back room, once piled high with unused canvases, and transformed it into a makeshift classroom. On a chalkboard scavenged from a thrift shop, he wrote in looping letters, "Art for everyone." Twice a week the room filled with children from the neighborhood, their hands smudged with charcoal, their laughter ringing like bells as they bent over sketch pads. Lucian moved among them with surprising ease, guiding small hands, offering gentle praise, and smiling as they unveiled their creations with shy pride. And at the heart of it all was Freya. She became the class muse, reclining near the window, her noble face turning toward the children as they sketched her graceful form. Her presence grounded the room, softening nerves, calming tears, drawing even the most hesitant child into the warmth of the moment. Lucian painted too, not just for the gallery walls that had once defined his success, but for the joy of it, for the way it captured the new pulsing rhythm of his life. His latest series, portraits of Freya among snowlight and laughter, caught the eye of collectors far beyond Whitmore. Yet when asked about them, Lucian always smiled quietly and said, "They're not just paintings, they're home." One evening, long after the children had gone, Lucian sat on the porch, a cup of tea cooling in his hand, as he watched the last of the sun dip below the rooftops. Freya lay at his feet, her head resting lightly against his boot, her eyes half closed in contentment. Lucian reached down, fingers brushing the soft fur at her neck, and marveled at the journey they had taken. He had once thought survival was enough, that solitude was safer, quieter, simpler. But now he knew better. Now he knew that survival was only the beginning, and that the truest life was one built from trust, connection, and the warmth that never faded, no matter the storms that came. As the stars pricked into the velvet sky, and the town settled into its evening hush, Lucian Merrick sat with Freya and let the quiet wrap around them, not as a shield, but as a promise. They had crossed from shadow into light, from solitude into belonging. And in the deep, enduring stillness of that moment, Lucian understood they were home. In the end, Lucian and Freya's journey reminds us of a profound truth that miracles do not always come in the form of lightning or parted seas. They often come quietly wrapped in the fragile trust between a broken soul and a patient heart. It is through the smallest acts of kindness, the decision to open a door, the choice to stay, when it would be easier to walk away, that we become instruments of grace in a hurting world. Their story teaches us that God often works through ordinary hands, a neighbor who cares a friend, who fights a stranger, who shows up just when we feel alone. And in these moments when we choose love over fear, we witness the quiet unfolding of miracles all around us. In your own life, remember that you too can be part of someone's miracle. Whether it's showing compassion to a stranger, offering a helping hand, or simply being present, these small acts ripple farther than you know. We invite you to share your thoughts or your own stories of hope and healing in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs encouragement today. And as you go forward, may God bless you and keep you, and may His love guide your steps and fill your days with unexpected light.